Ranger dropped to his belly across the seam of the door and would not be moved. Sergeant Lorraine Pratt crouched 2 feet from him, a treat cupped in her palm, her voice low and steady. The Malinois only stared, ears forward, breath fogging in the cold hallway. "What are you telling us, boy?" she whispered. "What did Marcus leave in there?" The dog's amber eyes held hers, unblinking, as if the answer were already in the room, waiting. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one. 6 weeks earlier, on the second Tuesday of October, Marcus Whitaker had knelt in his tomato garden with a pair of pruning shears in his hand, and he had not gotten up. His neighbor found him around 3 in the afternoon, cheek pressed against the loose dirt, a half smile on his mouth as if he had heard a good joke at the last moment. The paramedic said his heart had simply stopped. 58 years old. 22 of those on the county sheriff's payroll. 9 of them beside the same graying Belgian Malinois he had raised from a pup he called Ranger. The town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania was not large. 2 stoplights, a diner that served biscuits at 4 in the morning for the men coming off the 3rd shift at the pallet mill, a church with a white steeple that leaned a little to the east, and 1 small brick building on Poplar Street, where the county sheriff's substation had operated since before Marcus was born. Everyone knew everyone. The casseroles came steady for the first 3 weeks after the funeral, then thinner, then only from Pratt and from Ruth Reed, who left a foil-covered dish on the porch every Sunday without knocking. Diane Whitaker kept the porch light on for those quiet deliveries. She did not have the words yet to say thank you. What she did have in the mornings was a missing dog. Ranger had never been the kind of animal who wandered. He had lived 9 years on a schedule so precise, Marcus used to joke that the dog owned a wristwatch. Up at 5:30, bowl at 5:35, long walk from 6 to 7, kennel to sleep between calls. When Marcus retired him at the age of 8, Ranger had adjusted like a man handed a gold pocket watch and a hammock. He slept longer. He learned to lie on the couch and stare at the wood stove as if he had earned the right. He followed Marcus from the kitchen to the workbench to the tomato beds, always 3 steps behind, never underfoot. But on the first frost of November, 5 weeks and 4 days after Marcus was buried, the mudroom flap swung open at 4:47 in the morning, and Ranger slipped out into the dark. Diane heard the plastic snap of the flap in her sleep and thought, in that dream-layered half-awake way, that Marcus was letting the dog out for his rounds. She did not check the clock until 6, and by then the dog was already sitting straight-backed at the rear door of the old brick station on Poplar Street, ears forward, breath fogging the air, waiting. She found him there on a hunch, in her husband's old flannel and a pair of jeans that had gotten too loose since the funeral. She parked at the curb and watched Ranger for a long minute before she opened her door. The dog did not turn. He did not glance her way when she called. He simply sat as if he were still on shift. "Buddy," she said, walking up slow. "Buddy, come home." Ranger did not move. Diane crouched beside him and put her hand on the back of his neck. He turned his head an inch, licked her wrist once, and returned his gaze to the rear door of the station. His body was rigid with waiting. When Sergeant Lorraine Pratt pulled into the lot at 6:30 on the dot with a paper cup of coffee steaming through the lid, Ranger stood, took a step toward the door, and looked at her expectantly. Pratt let out a breath that had nothing to do with the cold. "Come on then," she said, unlocking the door. He walked in past her without a glance, past the front desk, past the coffee pot Marcus used to fill first thing every morning, and turned left down the corridor toward the evidence storage hallway. He stopped in front of Unit 42, which was the second door from the end, and lay down across the seam of the door. He would not move. Pratt watched him for a long time from the far end of the corridor. She was not a woman given to superstition. She had been Marcus's patrol partner before she had ever been a sergeant, and she had watched him raise Ranger from a squirming brown ball on a blanket in the back of the cruiser. She had watched Marcus teach the dog to alert. She had watched him retire the dog with a paper certificate in a wooden frame. She had also watched Marcus, in his last 6 months of life, sit on that same porch bench with the dog at his feet and stare at the sky for so long she had started to worry he was losing pieces of himself. She walked to the desk, picked up the office phone and called Diane, who was still standing in the parking lot with her arms wrapped around herself. "He came in," Pratt said. "You want me to bring him out?" "I don't think he'll come," Diane said. Her voice was low. "Lorraine, he's not confused, he's working." Pratt was silent a long moment. "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." They tried for 3 mornings to bring him home. On the second morning, young Andre Bishop, the newest patrolman on the roster, whose father had died in a mill accident when the boy was 7, and who had grown up calling Marcus uncle at the 4th of July cookouts, tried to lift Ranger off the floor by his collar. The dog did not growl. He did not snap. He simply went limp in Andre's arms with such total refusal that the young officer almost cried in the hallway. He set the dog down, and Ranger returned to his station across the seam of the door and lay back down, and Andre walked outside and stood in the cold air with his hat off, blinking at the trees. On the 3rd morning, Diane brought a slice of the ham that Ranger had loved his entire life. She held it out to him where he lay. He did not turn his head. She put the ham on the floor 2 inches from his nose. He did not smell it. She sat on the linoleum beside him for an hour with her back against the concrete wall, and finally she pressed her cheek to the top of his grey muzzle and whispered, "What did he tell you, sweet boy? What did he ask you to do?" Pratt was watching from the doorway. She saw the dog's eyes close for the first time in 3 days at the touch of Diane's cheek. She saw the ears twitch. She saw the ribcage rise once and fall once, slow. And then she turned around, walked back to her desk, and pulled the evidence ledger down off the shelf. Unit 42. The book was old. She had to flip past 6 years of updates to find the original entry. Her finger stopped on a line she had not read in a long time. Unit 42, Ellery Reed case. Filed by Deputy Whitaker, September of the year Marcus turned 42. Pratt sat down in her chair. She did not move for a minute. Then she closed the ledger, walked back down the hall, and stood over the sleeping dog. Everyone in Millbrook remembered the Ellery Reed case. Ellery had been 9 years old. He had gone to a church picnic on a Saturday afternoon in the last hot week of August, 16 years back, at the county park on the north end of the lake. His mother, Ruth, had brought a peach pie. Ellery had a paper plate with 2 slices of watermelon and a hot dog, and he had run off toward the dock with 3 other boys around 1:30. When Ruth called the children back for dessert at 3, the other 3 came. Ellery did not. They searched the lake with divers for 4 days. They searched the woods with dogs for 2 weeks. They searched every barn and shed and abandoned trailer in a 20-mile radius. There was no shoe, there was no jacket, there was no witness who had seen him leave. He was simply, completely gone. Marcus had been the first deputy on the scene. He had been the first to sit across a kitchen table from Ruth Reed at midnight and tell her nothing, because there was nothing to tell. He had run the case for 8 years as active. And then, when the county reclassified it as cold, he had run it for another 8 in his own time, in the evenings, at his desk, with a green banker's lamp, with a spiral notebook Diane had bought him at the drugstore, and a highlighter he kept losing behind the couch cushion. He had never told her what he thought had happened to that boy. But she had watched him, on the anniversary each August, drive out to the county park alone with a paper cup of coffee and sit on the picnic bench until the sky went grey, and she knew that he was not going to die easy while that case was open. She also knew, though she had never said it out loud, that he had known something in his last year of life that he had not told her. something that had settled his shoulders and put a stillness in him that had not been there before. She had thought at the time it was peace. She had thought it was age. Now, sitting on the linoleum beside a dog who would not eat and would not leave, she thought maybe she had been wrong about both. Pratt cleared her throat. Diane looked up. "I want to open the unit," Pratt said. Diane did not answer for a long moment. Then she nodded and she pushed herself up off the floor, and she stepped back so the sergeant could work the padlock. The room inside was small, 3 shelves deep, the air dry and paper-smelling, labeled bags in grey plastic bins, a boy's blue windbreaker in a sealed evidence sleeve, a yellow bicycle helmet with a strap that had been cut. Ranger, when the door swung open, did not go for any of it. He walked past the shelves, past the bins, past the folded plastic sleeves, and he stopped at the far corner where a plain brown shoebox had been sitting on the lowest shelf for so long that its cardboard corners had softened. He pressed his nose against the taped seam of the box and sat down. Pratt lifted the shoebox down. She set it on the small table by the door. She looked at Diane. Diane nodded. The tape lifted easy. Inside were the boy's shoes, small brown Velcro sneakers with a scuff of green paint along the toe. Beneath the shoes, in a plastic sleeve, was a cassette tape with no writing on it. Beneath the plastic sleeve was a cardboard liner Marcus himself had cut to fit the box. Beneath the cardboard liner was a plain white envelope, unaddressed, in her husband's careful handwriting, marked simply, "Play this if I am not here." Diane's hand shook once. Pratt reached over and steadied the box, and then she lifted the envelope, and then she looked at Diane for permission before opening it. Diane nodded. Inside was a single folded page and a smaller envelope taped shut with 2 strips of Scotch tape. Pratt opened the page. "To whoever finds this," Marcus had written, "if Ranger brought you here, then he did what I asked. Please do not be angry with him. He is not confused. He is finishing what I could not. The tape has a voice memo I recorded 3 weeks ago. Play it in the presence of Sergeant Pratt. Do not play it alone. Do not play it in front of Ruth Reed until you have done what the tape asks. I love you, Diane. I am sorry I did not tell you. I did not want to be wrong twice." Diane sat down hard on the folding chair by the wall. Pratt read the page a second time, silently. Then she looked at the smaller envelope, taped shut, and she did not open it. She slid it into her jacket pocket. She lifted the cassette tape carefully out of its sleeve and she said, "There's an old player in the file room. I'll get it." That was how, on the 6th of November of that year, at 8:17 in the morning, Sergeant Lorraine Pratt and Diane Whitaker sat in the file room of the substation on Poplar Street and pressed play on a voice memo that Marcus Whitaker had recorded 8 days before he died. His voice came through soft. The tape hissed for a moment, then he cleared his throat. "Lorraine, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I know how this is going to sit with you. I want you to write down 2 things. The first is a name, Deacon Harold Kimball. You know the one. Drove the church van the day of the picnic. The second is an address, 27 Ashfield Road, end of the county line. There's a crawl space under the back porch. There's a false floor in it. I did not have the warrant. I did not have the probable cause. I sat in my truck across from that house for 11 nights in a row this September, and I could not make my hand touch the doorknob. I need you to make it touch. Get a warrant. Take Andre. Take Ranger if you can. I owe that mother an answer, Lorraine. I owe her boy an answer. If I do not live to give it, please give it for me." The tape hissed a moment longer. Then it clicked off. Pratt reached across the desk without looking, gripped Diane's hand, and did not let go. She was breathing hard through her nose. Diane was crying without making any sound. Ranger, who had followed them into the file room and lain down under the desk, was completely still. his eyes open, his ears forward, listening for the man on the tape, as if the voice would come back, if only he waited long enough. They drove out to Ashfield Road before sundown that same day. Pratt did not call ahead. She did not tell the county attorney the source, only that she had a credible tip from a confidential informant of long-standing trust. The judge, an old man named Hollister who had known Marcus for 30 years, signed the warrant at 4:15 in the afternoon without asking who the informant was, though he looked at Pratt for a long time over his reading glasses. 27 Ashfield Road was a two-story farmhouse at the end of a dirt drive, painted white a very long time ago and now peeling, a red mailbox with the name Kimball on the side in stick on letters. A porch that sagged in the middle, a hound tied to a run in the side yard who barked once when the cruisers pulled in and then flopped down as if the day was already too long. Andre Bishop drove one cruiser, Pratt drove the other, with Ranger in the back seat. Diane sat in the passenger side of Pratt's car and stayed there when they got out. Her presence was not procedure, but Pratt had not been willing to leave her at the station either, and Diane had not been willing to be left. Harold Kimball answered the door in a grey cardigan. He was 71 years old. He had thin white hair combed straight back. He had taught Sunday school for 42 years. He had driven the church van since Marcus was in high school. When he saw Pratt with the warrant in her hand, his face did a thing that Pratt would think about for the rest of her life. It softened. It did not tighten. It did not go pale. It softened, as if something he had been carrying for a very long time had suddenly become lighter by exactly the weight of a shoebox. "I wondered if it would be Marcus who came," he said. "I heard he passed." "He did," Pratt said. "Then who told you?" Kimball said. Pratt did not answer. She held up the warrant. He read it slowly. He handed it back. "The crawl space is under the back porch," he said. "The panel lifts if you slide it toward the east. There is a light chain hanging from the joist. I have not gone down there in 11 years. I could not bring myself to. I could not bring myself to bring it up either. I am sorry. I have been sorry for a very long time." Andre Bishop stood in the doorway with his hand still on his holster, his face gone, the color of oatmeal. Pratt did not look at him. She stepped past Kimball into the front hall and cuffed him gently at the wrists, not because he had resisted, but because she needed the ritual of it to keep her own hands from shaking. She read him his rights. He nodded at every sentence. She sat him on the porch bench and told Andre to stay with him, and she went around back with Ranger on a lead she had borrowed off the wall of the substation. The panel lifted the way Kimball had said it would. The chain gave a small dry rattle when she pulled it. A yellow bulb came on. Ranger did not need to be told what to do. He went down the wooden steps first, and he did not stop at the 2 duffel bags stacked against the concrete pier, and he did not stop at the child's baseball glove hanging from a nail. He stopped at a plywood square set into the crawlspace floor, and he lay down across the seam of it, exactly the way he had lain across the seam of Unit 42, and he waited. Pratt lifted the plywood. She did not scream. She did not make any sound at all. She reached back for the radio on her shoulder, and she called it in without her voice ever going above a whisper. Then she sat down on the dirt floor of the crawlspace, with her hand on Ranger's back, and she cried for the first time in 9 years, silently, her whole body shaking with it, while the dog leaned against her ribs and did not move. What she found down there was the answer Marcus Whitaker had spent 16 years chasing. It is not necessary to describe it here. It was the kind of answer no mother should ever have to receive, and yet Ruth Reed, when Pratt drove out to her house at 9:43 that night, had been waiting for it for 16 years, and she stood at her screen door with her hand pressed over her mouth and said, "You found him," before Pratt could speak. Pratt nodded. Ruth Reed sat down on her porch step. She did not cry. She looked at the sky for a long time. Then she said in a voice so calm it broke something in Pratt's chest, "Marcus promised me he would not stop." Pratt said, "He kept his promise." Ruth Reed nodded once. Then she said, "Come inside. I need to make coffee. "I do not think I will sleep tonight." That should have been the end of the story. It was not the end of the story. Diane Whittaker did not learn until 3 days later, when Pratt sat her down at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and the second envelope from Marcus's shoebox, unopened between them, that the deacon Harold Kimball had confessed to something he had not done. He had confessed to the whole of it. He had signed the papers. He had refused a lawyer. He had told the county attorney that he had taken Ellery Reed off the picnic grounds in his church van, that he had brought the boy to the farmhouse, that he had been alone in the crime, and alone in the burial, and alone in the silence for 16 years. But Pratt, who had been a patrol officer once and a homicide investigator for 11 years before she came back to Millbrook to take the sergeant's chair, did not believe him. "His shoulder," Pratt said. "He tore his rotator cuff in the winter of the year before Ellery went missing. He was in a sling that whole summer. There is a photo of him in the church bulletin from the July picnic in the sling. He could not have carried the boy. He could not have lifted the plywood. He could not have done half of what he swore he did alone." Diane was still. "Then why?" "Because he loved someone," Pratt said. "And he's going to die in a cell in the next 5 years anyway, and he thinks he can carry the whole weight out with him." Diane looked at the second envelope, which Pratt had set on the table between them. "Marcus knew," she said. "I think Marcus knew," Pratt said. Diane reached for the envelope with a hand that did not shake this time. She opened it. Inside was a single folded card, and on the card, in her husband's handwriting, were 4 words and a line drawn under them. "He was not alone." Under the line, in smaller writing, was a second sentence: "Ask Ranger about the truck." Diane looked up at Pratt. Pratt looked at the dog, who was lying under the kitchen table with his head on Diane's foot, and she said softly, "Ranger." "Truck." Ranger's ears rose. His head lifted. He stood up so slow that his old hips popped audibly, and he walked to the front door. And he sat down and stared at it, and he waited. Pratt got her coat. It took them 2 more mornings to understand what he was showing them. On the first morning, he led them from the front door of the Whittaker house down Poplar Street, past the substation, past the diner, past the pallet mill, out to the road that ran east along the ridge, and he sat down at the entrance of a long gravel driveway that led up to a house that Diane did not recognize, but Pratt did. "That's Wendell Kimball's place," Pratt said. Diane looked at her. "Harold's brother," Pratt said. "Wendell drove the pallet mill trucks for 35 years. He retired the same year Harold tore his shoulder." Diane felt cold rise up under her ribs. "He was at the picnic," Pratt said. "Wendell was at the picnic, I remember. He always came. He and Harold both." They did not go up the driveway that morning. Pratt was careful. Pratt knew that a dog leading them to a driveway was not evidence. She needed evidence. So she drove Diane home, and she called the county attorney, and she asked to see the photographs from the church bulletin archive at the parish office. On the second morning, she went alone to the parish office, and she pulled every bulletin from that summer. And in the July bulletin, she found the photograph of Harold Kimball in his sling, standing next to a taller man with the same jawline and the same thin nose, who was smiling at the camera with his arm around Harold's shoulders, Wendell Kimball. On the following page, in a photograph of the annual pallet mill picnic 3 weeks later, Wendell was shown standing beside the church van in a mill uniform, holding a set of keys. Pratt closed the bulletin. She sat very still for a long time. Then she stood up and went out to her cruiser. She did not go back to Ashfield Road that day. She went to the county records office and she pulled the deed history on 27 Ashfield. And she found what she had been afraid she would find. The farmhouse had not been owned by Harold Kimball in the year Ellery Reed went missing. It had been owned from the death of their father in the year Marcus turned 30, until a quit-claim transfer 9 years back by both Kimball brothers jointly. Harold had bought out Wendell's share for $1 and other valuable consideration in the same month that Marcus, according to his own spiral notebook that Diane had found in the bottom drawer of his desk, had first pulled the Ashfield property records. Marcus had known. Marcus had known that the crawl space was not just Harold's crawl space. Marcus had known that if he moved on Harold alone, Wendell would slip. And Marcus had not moved. Diane, when Pratt told her all of this in the kitchen that afternoon, put her face in her hands and cried, not from sorrow, but from a fury so cold and so complete she thought it might crack her ribs. Marcus had known. Marcus had watched Wendell Kimball buy his coffee at the diner 3 mornings a week for 8 years, and had smiled at him and had not moved. He was building it, Pratt said softly. Diane. He was building the whole case. He wanted both of them. He did not want one of them walking free. Then why the tape? Diane said. Why did he not just tell you? Pratt was quiet a long time. Then she said, because Wendell Kimball's son married my niece. Diane looked at her. Marcus did not want the connection to be through me until the evidence was airtight, Pratt said. He did not want me to be the one who reported it before I could not be argued with. He waited on his own body to fail because he could not wait on his heart. I would have gone in too soon. I would have gone in on him 10 years ago. He knew that. Diane sat back in her chair. She did not know what to say. Ranger, under the table, licked her ankle once softly, as if he had heard her name and could not remember why. That was the first turn. It was not the only one. 2 days after Harold Kimball's confession was made public, a woman named Alma Trask walked into the substation on Poplar Street with an envelope of photographs. Alma was 76 years old. She had lived on Ashfield Road her whole life. Her house was the last one on the west side of the road, half a mile down from the Kimball farmhouse. She had, she said, been afraid to bring the photographs in when Marcus Whitaker was alive, because Marcus had been Wendell Kimball's cousin's boyhood friend. She had not known who else to trust. She set the envelope on Pratt's desk and she said, I saw the van that day. I saw it come back to the farmhouse at 3:15 in the afternoon. I took the pictures with my late husband's camera because I did not know what else to do. Pratt opened the envelope. Inside were 3 black and white photographs developed from an old 35mm roll, showing the church van from a distance parked at the side of the Kimball farmhouse. In the front seat, on the driver's side, was Wendell Kimball. In the passenger seat was Harold Kimball. In the second row of the van, visible through the side window in the third photograph, was a small figure with its head bent forward. Pratt did not speak. Alma Trask, who had carried those photographs in a dresser drawer for 16 years, said, My husband told me to burn them. He said if the Kimballs found out, they would come. I did not burn them. I could not. My husband died in the winter of the year before last. I have been trying to find the courage since then. Pratt reached across the desk and took the woman's hand. You have it now, she said. Alma Trask did not cry. She said, I would like to meet the dog, Marcus's dog. I have heard about him. Pratt led her to the file room, where Ranger was lying with his head on his paws. Alma knelt slowly and put her hand under the dog's chin. Ranger's eyes closed. Alma said softly, Thank you, sweet boy, thank you. Wendell Kimball was arrested that same evening at 6:40 in the parking lot of the diner as he was leaving with a paper cup of coffee. He did not resist. He did not speak. He had been a taller man than his brother, and time had bent him. When Pratt read him his rights, he stared at the sidewalk for a long time, and then he said, How long have you known? Pratt said, Not long enough. The county attorney charged both brothers within a week. Harold Kimball retracted his solo confession the day the photographs became evidence. He gave a new statement, quietly, with the small dignity of a man setting down a heavy stone at last. He said that his brother had put the boy in the van. He said that he had helped his brother carry the boy into the crawl space. He said that he had been a coward for 16 years, and that he had lain awake every night of those 16 years hoping someone would come and hoping no one would. He said he had never loved anyone in his life the way he had loved his brother, and that love had made him complicit in a thing that no love should ever make a man do. He wept for the first time in the interview room, quietly, with his hands folded in his lap, and Pratt did not stop the tape. None of that was the whole story either, because on the 9th of November, on the third dawn after Alma Trask brought the photographs, Ranger got up in the dark and slipped through the mudroom flap for the 12th morning in a row. Diane heard the plastic snap of the flap, and she sat up in bed and she said out loud, "You are done, boy, you did it. Come home." But the dog did not hear her. He was already on Poplar Street. He was already turning at the substation. He was walking past the substation. He was walking east. He was walking to a place he had never been led before. Pratt got the call from Andre Bishop at 6:14. The young officer was in a cruiser doing his early rounds, and he had spotted the Malinois trotting alone down the shoulder of Route 9, and he had followed at a distance. The dog had turned off onto a farm access road that dead-ended at an old barn on the property of a man named Cyrus Halloran, who had been the church van's regular substitute driver on any Saturday that Wendell Kimball had been on the mill schedule. Andre parked at the mouth of the access road. He got out. He watched Ranger sit down in front of the barn door and wait. Pratt was there in 20 minutes with Diane. Cyrus Halloran, who was 68 years old and had emphysema and had been sitting on his porch drinking a mug of instant coffee, came down off his porch when he saw the cruisers. He looked at Ranger. He looked at Pratt. He said, "I have been waiting on this dog since I read the paper." Pratt said, "Waiting how?" Cyrus Halloran said, "Come inside. My hands are cold." He led them into his kitchen. He opened a cabinet under the sink. He pulled out a shoebox of his own, taped, dust-covered. He set it on the table. He said, "I was not there when it happened. I want that on the record. I was not there. But Wendell came to me the night after. He asked me to hold this box for him. He said if he ever came back for it, I was to give it to him and not to ask. He never came back for it. I opened it a year ago. I have not slept a full night since." He pushed the box across the table toward Pratt. "I did not have the courage to bring it in on my own. I am 70 pounds lighter than I was 2 years ago, Sergeant. I do not have long. I would like to die with this off my kitchen counter." Pratt lifted the lid. Inside was a small blue cassette tape and a driver's license and a set of car keys and a folded receipt from a hardware store in the neighboring county dated 3 days before Ellery Reed vanished, for a 100-pound roll of contractor plastic and a bag of quick-set concrete and a package of drywall screws. The driver's license was Wendell Kimball's. The cassette tape had a name written on it in blue pen in a child's hand. Ellery. Pratt did not touch anything in the box. She called it in. She had Andre drive Cyrus Halloran gently to the station to give a formal statement. She sat at the kitchen table with Diane and with the dog while the county evidence tech drove up from the West End. Diane, who had said nothing all morning, looked at the small blue cassette tape and said, "That is a child's tape." Pratt nodded. She had already understood. "He recorded himself," Diane said. "The boy. That is his voice." "Yes." Diane put her face in her hands. "I do not want to hear it," she said. "We will not play it here," Pratt said. "We will not play it at all if we do not have to." They did not have to. The physical evidence in the second box, taken together with Alma Trask's photographs and Harold Kimball's second statement and the deed history and the crawl space, was more than enough. Wendell Kimball, who had said nothing for 3 days in his cell, finally spoke on the afternoon of the 4th day. He asked to see Pratt. He asked her to sit across from him. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "The dog knew all these years. Did the dog know?" Pratt did not answer. "I saw him at the picnic," Wendell said. "That day he was a pup, Marcus was walking him around on a lead. The pup ran up to me, sniffed my shoe. Then Marcus called him back. I always wondered. Pratt still did not answer. Wendell folded his hands. He said in a voice so small it was hard to hear, "I did not mean to. It was not a plan. He fell in the water and I pulled him out and he was fine and I panicked. I do not know why I panicked. I have not known why for 16 years. I put him in the van. My brother tried to stop me. He tried to stop me and I would not stop. My brother is not a bad man. He was afraid of me. I want that in the record. My brother was afraid of me his whole life. He is a good man. Please do not let him die in prison, Sergeant. Please, he is a good man." He was crying by then, not loudly, the way old men cry with the mouth still. Pratt made him sign the statement. She left the room. She walked outside into the parking lot, and she stood in the cold air, and she did not know for a long time whether she wanted to break something with her hands or lie down in the grass and stay there. That was the second turn. There was a third. On the 12th of November, Ranger did not get up at 4:47. He got up at 4:23. He did not slip through the mudroom flap. He went to the front door and sat down and waited to be let out. Diane was already awake. She had not slept in 3 days. She opened the door for him. He walked out onto the porch. He turned to look at her. She thought in that moment that he was asking her to come with him, and so she pulled her boots on over her pajamas, and she grabbed her husband's coat from the rack, and she followed the dog into the dark. He did not go to Poplar Street. He went home. That is, he walked west along the road toward the small cemetery on the hill behind the pallet mill, where Marcus Whitaker had been buried in the last week of September under a marker that said his name and the years and the single word, beloved. The cemetery gate was chained, but not locked. Diane slipped the chain and pushed the gate open. Ranger walked through and up the gravel path between the stones. It was still very dark. There was a thin dusting of frost on the grass. The dog stopped at Marcus's marker and sat down beside it. He did not lie down. He sat straight-backed, ears forward, breath fogging the air, the way he had sat at the rear door of the substation on the first morning. Diane knelt beside him. She put her arm around him. She said, "Baby, oh, baby." Ranger licked her cheek once. His tongue was warm. His body was thin. She could feel the ribs against her arm. She sat with him in the dark for what she later thought must have been an hour, though her sense of time had gone strange in those weeks. The sky changed from black to a slow grey. The frost lifted. A cardinal called from the trees at the edge of the cemetery. Ranger did not move. Then at the moment the first line of sun broke over the ridge to the east and touched the top of Marcus's marker. The old Malinois turned his head, looked at Diane, licked her hand once more, laid his grey muzzle across the top of the stone, and sighed. He did not lift his head again. Diane stayed with him for a long time. She did not cry at first. She only held him. She held him with her hand on the back of his neck, the way Marcus had always held him when he came in from a hard day. She held him past the sunrise. She held him until Andre Bishop, who had gotten worried when he swung past the Whitaker house on his round and saw the front door open and the truck still in the drive, drove out to the cemetery on a hunch of his own and found her there. Andre knelt in the grass beside her. He did not speak for a long time. Then he took his hat off, and he set it on the grass, and he said, "Aunt Diane, let me help you carry him home." They carried him together. Andre took the front of the blanket they wrapped him in. Diane took the back. They laid him on the seat of Marcus's old truck between them, and they drove the 2 miles home, and Andre dug the hole in the yard beside the tomato garden, and Diane lined the bottom with an old sweater of Marcus's that still smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. They set Ranger down on the sweater. Diane knelt at the edge of the hole and put her hand on his grey muzzle one last time and said, "You did what he asked. You go on now. He is waiting on you." Andre filled the hole. Diane stayed on her knees while he worked. When he was done, he set the shovel down against the porch rail and sat beside her in the grass, and he wept openly, without hiding it. because he was 24 years old and he had lost the man who had raised him and the dog, who had been the last piece of him in the same season, and it was more than he could carry standing up. Diane put her arm around him. "You are not alone, Andre," she said. "Do you hear me? You are not alone." He nodded against her shoulder. The trial did not start for another 5 months. In the meantime, other things happened in Millbrook. Ruth Reed asked Diane to come to her house one evening in early December, and when Diane arrived, Ruth had set out 2 cups of coffee and a small wooden box on the kitchen table. In the box was a photograph of Ellery at 7, sitting on a porch step, holding a puppy. The puppy was a brown and black Belgian Malinois, 7 weeks old, with ears that had not yet come up. "Marcus brought Ranger over the day he picked him up," Ruth said. "He wanted Ellery to be one of the first to hold him. Ellery was so happy that day. I have looked at this picture every night for 16 years. I did not know Ranger was still with you until Lorraine told me. I want you to have the picture. I want you to know that dog held my boy. I want you to know." Diane took the picture. She put her hand over her mouth. She could not speak. "Marcus told me once," Ruth said, "that the day he brought Ranger home, he told the puppy that he was going to be a working dog, and that his first job was to find my son. Marcus said it as a joke. He was petting him. He was rubbing his belly. But he said it out loud. He told me later he thought maybe the pup had understood. I did not believe him then. I have believed a lot of things since." Diane began to cry, quietly, at the kitchen table. Ruth reached across the table and took her hand. "You are not alone in this house, Diane Whittaker," she said. "We have both of us been widowed by this town in our own way. You and I are going to have coffee once a week from now on. We are going to sit at this table. And when the trial starts, we are going to sit in the same row of that courtroom. Do you hear me?" Diane nodded. She could not speak. The trial began on the 4th of April, in the county courthouse in the town 22 miles south of Millbrook. It lasted 11 days. Harold Kimball pleaded guilty to conspiracy and accessory and to concealing a body, and he was sentenced to 15 years and told that with credit for time served, he would likely die inside, and he nodded at the judge and thanked him. Wendell Kimball took his case to a jury and lost on the 3rd day of deliberation. The verdict was read at 4:17 in the afternoon. Ruth Reed sat in the front row with her hand in Diane's. When the jury foreman said the word guilty, Ruth did not cry. She turned to Diane and said, "That is for my boy, and for your husband, and for that beautiful dog." Diane pressed her forehead against Ruth's temple and nodded. Outside the courthouse, in the pale spring sun, Sergeant Lorraine Pratt gave a short statement to the 2 local reporters who had covered the case. She was asked how the investigation had reopened after 16 years. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Deputy Marcus Whittaker never let this case go. He worked on it every night he could until the day he died. He built the case that closed today. I only carried the last mile of it. And he trained a dog to help him carry it. I would like the record to reflect the name of that dog. His name was Ranger. He was a Belgian Malinois. He served this county for 9 years on active duty, and he served it in his retirement in a way that no one asked him to and no one expected. He passed on the 12th of November of last year. He is buried in a yard next to a tomato garden. He was a very good boy. That is all I want to say." She turned and walked to her cruiser. Diane and Ruth walked beside her, one on each side, arm in arm. The county did a small ceremony in the substation 2 weeks later. They hung a framed photograph of Marcus in his uniform on the wall of the front hallway, and beside it, in a slightly smaller frame, they hung a photograph of Ranger sitting at Marcus's feet on the porch of the substation, taken by Andre Bishop, the summer ranger, retired. Under Ranger's photograph, they put a small brass plaque that said the dog's name and his years of service, and beneath that, one final line, which Pratt herself had insisted on. He finished the case. Diane stood in the front hallway for a long time on the day the plaques were hung. She looked at the two photographs together, side by side, at the man in the uniform and the dog at his feet, and she thought about the morning she had first followed Ranger out of the mudroom flap in the dark, and she thought about the hallway with the seam of the door, and she thought about the crawl space and the second box and the cassette tape she had refused to hear. She thought about all the things her husband had carried in silence, and all the things he had refused to set down, and all the things he had trained a dog to finish for him because his own heart had failed him first. She reached up and touched the brass plaque with the tip of one finger. "Rest, sweet boy," she said softly. "You brought him home." She turned and walked out of the substation into the spring sun. The wind that afternoon smelled of cedar and coffee and turned earth. A small breeze lifted the flag on the pole in front of the substation and let it drop. Diane crossed the parking lot to the truck. Andre was waiting for her in the passenger seat. He had grown a small mustache in the months since November. He looked older. He looked like Marcus, a little, around the eyes. She got in. He looked at her. "You okay, Aunt Diane?" he said. "I am," she said. He nodded. She started the engine. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she said, "Andre, do you know what he did with the puppies?" "What puppies?" Andre said. "Ranger's litter," she said. "There was one litter. Marcus's captain would not let him breed him again after the first because Ranger's line was too good for the county to lose, and he did not want to lose focus in training. There were 5 in the litter. 2 went to state K-9 units. 1 went to a family in Ohio. 1 went to Ruth Reed. She kept him for 11 years. He died the same summer Marcus retired." Andre nodded slowly. "That was Cooper. I remember him. He came to Ruth's porch every time we drove by." "And the 5th, Diane said, went to a family down south, a family with a young girl who had a hard time speaking. Marcus said the dog knew what the girl was thinking before the girl did. He wrote to that family every Christmas for 11 years. That dog is still alive, Andre. He is 14 years old. His name is Baxter, and that family called me last week." Andre looked at her. "Baxter has a son," Diane said, 6 weeks old. "The family is willing to give him to someone in Millbrook who understands the line. They asked me. I told them yes." Andre stared at her. "I do not want him to be my dog," Diane said. "I want him to be yours." Andre did not speak for a long time. Then his eyes filled up. He nodded once and looked out the window at the flag. "Aunt Diane," he said. "You are going to raise him right," she said. "You are going to raise him the way Marcus raised Ranger. You are going to teach him to sit. You are going to teach him to wait. You are going to teach him to alert. And one day, when you are an old sergeant in a station on Poplar Street, you are going to have a dog at your feet who came from the same blood, and it is going to matter." Andre wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. "When does he come?" he said. 2 weeks, Diane said. She put the truck in gear. "We are going to pick him up together, you and me and Lorraine. We are going to drive down and pick him up in this truck. And on the way back, you are going to tell me what you are going to name him." Andre nodded. He looked at his hands. "I already know," he said quietly. Diane looked at him. "Marcus," he said. Diane's mouth trembled. She pressed her lips together. She nodded. She reached across and squeezed his knee once. Then she pulled out of the parking lot, and they drove the 2 miles home in the spring light. The tomato garden was already turned. Diane had put the seedlings in the week before. The small mound of earth beside it, where Ranger was buried, was covered in a new growth of clover. She had planted the clover on purpose. Marcus had always said that clover was the softest green in the yard, and that a working dog should have soft green over him when the work was done. She parked the truck. She sat for a minute with her hands on the wheel and looked at the mound of clover and thought about the first frost of November and the plastic snap of the mud room flap in the dark. She thought about the man in the uniform on the wall of the substation. She thought about the seam of the door. She thought about the shoebox and the cassette tape and the second envelope and the 4 words and the dog leading her one morning after another from the porch of her house to the crawl space of a stranger's farmhouse to the marker on a hill above the pallet mill. She thought most of all about the sunrise over the ridge that had touched the top of the stone, and the grey muzzle laid across it, and the sigh and the stillness after. She had thought in the days after Marcus died that she had lost the last piece of him. She had been wrong. The last piece of him had slipped through the mudroom flap in the dark on the first frost of November, and had walked 2 miles to the rear door of an old brick station, and had lain down across the seam of a door and refused to move, because a good man in his last quiet weeks had trained a good dog to finish a promise that his own heart could not keep. That was what she thought, sitting in the truck in the spring sun, looking at the clover. She got out. She closed the door softly, so as not to startle the small wren that was building a nest under the eave of the porch. She walked across the yard to the mound of clover. She knelt down beside it. She put her hand on the soft green. "Baby," she said, "there is a puppy coming home. His name is Marcus. Andre is going to raise him. You would have loved that." The clover was warm under her palm. A small breeze moved through the tomato leaves. The sun was high enough now that the shadow of the porch fell short of where she was kneeling, and her whole hand was in the light. She did not cry. She had done her crying. She stood up slowly, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked into the house through the front door instead of the mudroom, because she wanted, on that day, to close the front door behind her the way a woman closes a front door on a new season. The house was quiet. The kettle was cold. The morning newspaper was folded on the table. The photograph Ruth Reed had given her of Ellery at 7 with a 7-week-old puppy on his lap sat in a small silver frame on the mantel above the wood stove, beside a photograph of Marcus in his patrol uniform, beside a photograph of Ranger in his last summer with his grey muzzle in the tomato leaves. She looked at the 3 photographs for a long time. Then she turned on the kettle. She put 2 mugs down on the counter because Ruth was coming for coffee at 4, and she pulled the coffee tin down from the shelf, and she scooped 4 spoonfuls into the paper filter, 1 for each of them, and 1 for Marcus, and 1 for Ranger. It was not a superstition. It was not a prayer. It was only a small habit she had begun in December and had not been able to stop, and she did not want to stop because it was, she had come to understand, the smallest possible way of saying to a house that had been full and was now emptier that she remembered, and that she was not letting go of them, and that they were still, in the smallest possible way, welcome to a cup. Outside in the yard, the wren carried a piece of straw up under the eave. The clover moved in the breeze. The tomato seedlings were beginning to lean toward the sun. And in the small brick station on Poplar Street, 2 miles down the road, a Belgian Malinois in a framed photograph sat forever at the feet of a man in a patrol uniform under a brass plaque that said, in 6 small words, the truest thing anyone in Millbrook could say about him. He finished the case. If this story moved you the way it moved us to write it, do us a small favor. Leave a comment down below and tell us what you would have done if you had been Diane on that first cold morning at the substation door. Give this video a like so more people can meet Ranger and Marcus. And most of all, subscribe to the channel, because we tell true feeling stories like this every week, and we do not want you to miss the next one. Thank you for listening. Take care of the good dogs in your life. They are, more often than we deserve, taking care of us.